Hey folks, Bernakevitch here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. Today we are talking about farmer direct meat purchase. This is a video for the family food course. And if you're interested in the family food course, check out RegenerativeLiving.online. Getting into it today, there's lots of different ways to get our protein and our meat. And we want to be aware of those different types so that way we can make the best choice for our family where we're at today. This decision may change over time. We may find ourselves in different positions or different opportunities or different constraints. And it's important to keep in mind that there's a lot of different options. And going to the grocery store and buying a cut of meat is probably the most expensive way to buy meat, not only in terms of cost for your wallet, but also cost for your health and for the environment. And we want to be aware of that because as we come into buying farm direct meat, almost all of the cost drops, the financial cost, the health costs that your body takes on by eating that meat, as well as the ecological costs. Usually smaller producers have less impact. There's less concentration of manures and issues. And when animals concentrate, there tends to be more intervention that's needed, be it hormones or antibiotics or pollution. So farm direct meat is an exceptional way if it fits your style and context, and we're not saying it does. We're just saying that this is an opportunity for you to evaluate and see when and where this makes sense. So we're mostly talking about land animals. There are herd shares or community supported agriculture shares when it comes to fishing. If you're in a local fishing area, or you can contact a fisherman that's working in this way. And all of this applies to those types of protein acquirement strategies for fishing. But we're going to mostly be talking about land-based animals today. So we're going to go through cuts, portions, herd share, why and what, pros and cons, how to buy in, and terminology. So let's jump in with some terminology about cuts, portions, and herd share. So when you go to a grocery store and you buy a chop, a shoulder roast, that's what you can buy from Farm Direct as well. Those cuts will typically, if you're not buying certified organic with an understanding of where that meat is coming from, chances are if you buy a single cut direct from a farmer, you're going to be paying on par or more than the grocery store. Only reason being is that you're paying for a lot more quality. And we'll talk very quickly about what that looks like when we get into some of the pros of being a consumer and buying farm direct. We can also buy portions, so we can buy a fraction of the animal, a quarter, a half, a whole, a third. This means that we're buying usually the entire animal from either a live weight, which is live on the hoof, running around, hanging weight, which is after it's been dressed, which we'll talk about, or sometimes cut weight. Sometimes you will get a portion of cut weight, but normally it's carcass or hanging weight. And then finally, there's herd share, which is purchasing a share in a herd. It's like purchasing a stock. You adopt the risk of the farmer, but also the reward. This in places where there's restrictions around non-pasteurized milk has been very popular because around the legal requirements, you cannot sell milk to a customer. But if that customer owns the cow, if they have a share in the cow, you're actually not selling to anybody. That's an owner of the cow that's just taking the milk out of it. And the way that structure works, it's a way around some of the legalese that comes with pasteurized milk. And we're not going to talk about that ethically. We're not going to talk about that nutritionally. We're just going to talk about access because that's a course and an entire conversation on its own. So a herd share, you can think of as a contractual agreement between a farmer and an owner of a livestock. The shareholder or member becomes one of those owners, and they can get milk or meat or offal, which is the organs and the bones, tends to be the most nutrient dense portions of the animal as well. Herd shares can be cow shares or goat shares or pig shares or sheep shares, sometimes called farm shares or dairy shares as well. but they can be a great way of connecting with and really investing in your local community. So some of the pros of farm direct meat purchase, be it cuts, portions, or full herd shares, is taste. So first and foremost, the taste of the meat is unlike anything you're going to find in the grocery store. And that can be a pro and a con if you have been, if your palate has been conditioned to some pretty bland meat. Sometimes the nature of the meat you're buying can be very surprising to your taste buds. That's an important thing to take note of, is that you're probably going to readjust your taste buds and readjust to the quality that you're getting. One of the interesting things about accessing proteins that are produced in a higher ethic than is akin to conventional meat produced is that taste, that nutrition, and that health is probably going to be the best you can put into your body or your children's body, which means it's going to be a little different. The taste, the texture, the process might be a little different, but the nutrition is usually through the roof. The health is usually through the roof, and it's usually a much better product to put into your body. The other thing that's incredible is that local economy connection. So by supporting these farmers, you're directly supporting that economic conversation that's in your local area. You get to support the individuals that you want to. You get to allow those dollars that you put into your local situation or your local environment, and the profit goes directly into those individuals. It's not going to corporations. It's not going to distribution. When we talk about cost for quality, this isn't like comparing the meat that you're getting from this farmer to Costco. It's going to be a completely different product. And that's an important piece. That's where that taste, nutrition, and health comes into play. So if you were to compare them side by side, sometimes they might be on par, sometimes they might be below, sometimes they might be above cost, but you're not comparing an apples to apples product. You're not going to compare a handmade tool made with hardwood that is tight grained, that has been forged by tempered steel that will last for 12 generations with something that comes off of a Chinese plastic factory line. They're going to be a completely different product. And so you'll want to be aware that when you're asking questions about a farm, when you're asking about how it's raised, which we'll get into later on, you have a good sense of what those elements are, because that's really that quality. Another great pro is you start to become and build relationships with your local food shed, with your producers, with the individuals around you, with the animals themselves, if that's part of how the farmer runs their herd share or their direct meat purchase. And you really get a sense to know exactly how the animal was treated. You can ask questions, look at photos of their operation, know where those animals lives. And it's an enormous advantage over our conventional food system, which is intentionally opaque and actively discourages scrutiny. So one of the great things about Farm Direct is any farmer who says, yeah, come on the farm at any time, you know that they've got nothing to hide. Whereas when we take a look at confined animal feedlots, or CAFOs, C-A-F-O, CAFOs, confined animal feedlots, usually they're under barbed wire. Usually you can't get close to them because there's barbed wire around the fields that they're on, because the way that those animals are raised is not what you'd want to put into your body. And so they actually have to distance the knowledge of the raising of those animals from the consumer, or else people would think twice before they bought them. When we take a look at producers, one of the great pros is that it's easy to plan. If you know you've got 10 individuals who are either buying half animals or so and so many cuts, or as being a herd share, which is taking on the risk and the reward of the farmer, you can know what you're planning for. You know what you can buy for feed. You know what you can expand potentially. You have a sense of security, and that security is incredible for small producers because there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of risk. Small scale food producers take on more risk than I think I've ever met out of any occupation. You're taking on ownership and responsibility of an animal, but you're also taking on the responsibility to make sure that you deliver on what you've said. And sometimes when that doesn't happen, producers will buy from others. And, there's so much obligation and commitment from producers, which is really important to keep in mind. The other great thing is that there's no overage, there's no waste. So they know what they're producing to stock, and then they're selling that stock. So you don't have half a freezer, 2 freezers full of animal that you're like, oh, I still have to sell this. And last but not least, you can build an incredible reputation. Nothing says quality like knowing the reputation of the food that you have and then the individuals that are consuming it. When we take a look at some of the cons for consumers, you need extra space. That's if you're buying half an animal or a full animal, you'll need the space, you'll need the freezer space. You'll need to be able to put that in some place, which can, for some people, be frustrating. That can be a lot to take on. And this is one of the reasons why when you're starting, if you want to take half an animal with another family or with some friends, it's a great way to start in. So you can mitigate almost all of these cons. Same thing with upfront investment. If you're like me and you hate shopping, I love like 2 or 3 $500 purchases a year. Also, when it comes out for costing, instead of 2 or 3 $500 purchases a year, if I was buying my meat cuts every single week at the same quality, I would be paying, last time I did the check, I think it was double. So instead of $1,500, it would be $3,000 or $3,500 a year. You're not always going to know the exact price. So if you buy half an animal, the herd share, if you're working at that way, or the portion purchase, farmer is going to give you a rough estimate of what that hoof price will be. So that'll be a living animal on the hoof. That's one of the ways I buy lamb. I've got a farmer by me who tells me it's $2.50 a pound live weight. I also go in and help with the killing and the skinning, and I do all the butchering myself with my partner. But there's also an idea of, well, what's the price when it comes to the hanging weight? And we don't know how many pounds it's going to be. So that extra space, that upfront investment, and the exact price may wildly vary. We'll get a sense later on exactly where that might be, but it's something to consider. And the last thing is you're going to get exposed to different cuts. You're going to get different cuts of meat. You're not just going to get pork chops. You're not just going to get steaks. You're going to get a whole bunch of different types of cuts of meat, and offal and organs and bones that you may not have ever experienced before, which for me is an opportunity to learn and grow with how I access my food. But if you're unaware of it, it may be one of those moments where it makes you really some anxiety. How am I going to work with this? For the producer, there's a little bit of extra pressure. Now all of a sudden you're trying to commit to a group of people. So there's a bit of extra pressure instead of just, I have this meat, whoever wants to buy it can buy it. There's usually more communication involved, what's going on in the farm, what's happening. And there's a higher level of customer dissatisfaction with all the different variables we were talking about. I've sent people to farming friends of mine that I love the meat of, and they were pure city folks raised on McDonald's hamburgers, and they're like, it's really chewy, or it's kind of got a weird smell or a taste to it. And that's one of those issues, is that the expectations that a customer comes to a small producer, they're coming with years of conventional farming experience, and their taste buds have adjusted. So it is something to keep in mind when you work with small scale producers. There are a ton of terms, and these terms sometimes can be misleading. These terms can sometimes be intentionally misleading, and these terms change from country to country. Really understand and look at what your government or your regulatory bodies work with. But generally, when we get to certified organic, in Canada, it's Canada Organic, and there's a bunch of organic companies that thread through that. And in the States, there's certified organic as well. But it's really the only term at this point that is under federal legislation. And if they use the logo, if they use the name, they have to be fully audited. They have to have record keeping systems. It's quite a process. I've helped a number of folks get through organic certification. It is a trial. So if somebody wants to go through that, you can know that they've had this high standard. And that was That was definitely a big piece for a number of the producers. It also means that there's a couple of aspects. They're going to have some kind of respect for the environment, but not always. There's a lot of big name organic companies that completely destroy their farms and completely destroy their landscapes. But generally speaking, folks who go through this process on the small scale, because it takes a lot of effort, big scale, it's just a line item on the budget. But for small scale, they usually have a great respect for the environment. They protect long-term health of the soil. They encourage soil biological activity. They want to create humane living conditions, and they usually recycle resources mostly because they have to. Organic production usually does not permit the use of synthetic pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, sewage sludge, genetically modified organisms, any sort of ionizing radiation, or growth hormones that they might use to produce meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, etc. These types of standards can be recognized in other countries, and usually the score, if we want to call it a score for certified organic, is high, because you can usually have a good sense of what that may or may not be. When we get to grass-fed or finish, grass-fed means that they've been fed grass. The animals have been fed grass. This is normally specific to ruminants like cows. They've been fed some grass, or they've been finished on grass. And one of the things you really want to look for if you're looking for total grass-fed is 100% grass-fed. But again, that is not regulated. Same thing with corn-fed and grain-fed. It's great that somebody is willing to tell you exactly what was put into their animal. At least they're being a bit transparent, but it doesn't give you that full picture. Free-ranged, as again, I think people think free-ranged or pasture-raised, and they're like, oh, the chickens are rolling over the acres. Well, it just means that they're not in battery cages, which are these small, tight cages that chickens in particular, are usually in confined animal feedlots. But that doesn't mean they're not packed into a barn where they can't even move. So free range is, again, one of those terms that can really be nebulous. And again, why it's so important to create direct relationships with farmers and producers. Farm to raise is kind of becoming quite popular, and there is no regulation about it at all. It's more about bringing up a sentimental value inside of the consumer and making them think, oh, this is what... this sounds pleasant, and doesn't it feel like I'm doing a good job in being a consumer? Natural can mean that there's no additional color or flavoring put in, but depending on the country, it can also be questionable if that's regulated. Naturally raised is something that generally has no regulation. It's just kind of a toss away. Pasture raised, it should mean that animals roam in a natural environment and eat forage, but again, unregulated term, has no clear meaning. A feedlot operation can still be pasture raised technically, because again, there's no regulation. Antibiotic free, again, while there is no regulation around it, we hope that that's what the producer is speaking about. And this is why, again, we come back to, it's so good to know your producers. Raised without the use of added hormones. Again, something that you can stick on a label, and it's fine, but you don't know what that is. Sustainably raised, humanely raised, ethically raised. Again, no regulations around. You have to ask questions to know what that means. Fed no animal byproducts. Again, that is something that people are actively putting on product. If they're talking about a specific breed name, Angus, Kobe, Berkshire, that's great. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that the animal was raised well. It just means, oh, here's a name. And that's the power of marketing. You hear Angus beef or Kobe beef, and you're like, oh, it's good. No, it's just a breed. It's just the name of the cultivar, so to speak. So it doesn't say anything about how they were raised. And AAA, AA Prime was a beef industry created a voluntary grading system in the 1920s, and the grading of beef was really about the intramuscular fat, or marbling, and you can kind of interpret it as lean, moderately fat, fat, and really fat. And again, makes no distinction about how the animal was raised. So it's one of those things that's really important, is to understand where and how your meat is raised, because those labels don't necessarily mean much. When we get into terminology, especially when you're buying animals direct from farmer, you're going to find that there's a couple of different words that they're going to throw around. There's going to be live weight, which is on the hoof, or hoof weight. There's going to be hanging weight, dressed weight, or carcass weight, which means no skin, no intestines, no organs, no hoof, usually blood or head. So usually that's all taken out. And then there's going to be take-home weight or package weight or cut weight, cuts like you'd see in the grocery store. And when we look at beef, pork, and lamb, generally the percentages are coming from live weight to dressed weight. So going from this 1,200 pounds of cow to 732 pounds of being dressed is about 61%. So roughly 61% of this 1,200 pounds is 732. And then from that dressed weight over to the packaged weight is again about 67%. So you're taking 1,200 pounds of animal on the hoof, you're removing the skins, intestines, organs, hoof, blood, and head, getting down to 732. And then after you've cut it into all of your different cuts, you're getting down to 490. So usually if you are buying half an animal, you're buying half of this hanging weight, and they're literally cutting the animal in half, and half of it goes to you and half of it goes to somebody else. And depending on your producer, you may be paying half of the hanging weight. Usually that's what's happening. So where do you find your local producers? Good producers are hard to find, and rightly so. They tend to have good relationships with their customers. They tend to be really happy about how they work with their customers. So they want to have a good sense of who they are and how they work. So something that you need to keep aware of is you need to go and find those individuals. Social media, Facebook, classifieds, community publications. Really find that. In my local area, I had to hunt for the individuals who were doing the lamb and the beef and the pig that I was really interested in. Some questions to ask, do you sell cuts, portions, or shares? Where do your animals live on farm? What are you feeding them? Do you breed them? Where do you buy your animals? What do you do when they get sick? Do you offer farm tours? Can I see pictures of the animals? And what you can expect is that there's going to be a couple of changes. There's going to be communication changes in production schedule. There may be updates about the farm operation. Good producers are going to seek to understand a customer's expectations. And sometimes they're the contact in the herd share, and sometimes somebody else is for that contact. To be a good customer of a herd share or a portion purchase is, read up on the literacy of the producer, know what their herd share or their direct purchasing is. Producers are producing. Not all of them have great resources describing what they do. They may not have a website or fully explained offering of the herd share. Sometimes you have to go on instinct or on trust. You'll usually have to pay a deposit in a timely manner. A good friend of mine offered me half a pig that he grew, and when it got onto the butcher's floor, he'd been working for 30 years in the abattoir. Abattoir is a word for slaughterhouse or butcher house in Salt Spring Island. And the butcher was like, in 30 years, I've never seen pigs that look this good. Like, what did you do? And my friend was telling them how they were fed on microgreen flats and apples that came from the orchard and all the rest of it. They got scratches and snuggles and things of that nature. But that all is that story of the animal, understanding where the animal comes from, understanding how to work with these animals. And when my friend Brandon, when he told me, I'm thinking about asking for a deposit from everyone, I don't want to be on the hook. And most producers, especially on his scale, are pretty apologetic. I just sent him $250 because that's what he was talking about. And he said, what's this for? I'm like, it's the deposit for the animal. And he was so profuse in his thanks because most of this is done at a subsidy for the producer. They usually don't factor in their labor. I take it as a big honor to be a part of it. Remember that animals may be heavier or lighter. So if you're thinking, well, half weight is roughly this, they may be 50, 100 pounds more or less. And you can't say it's too much or too little. It's your responsibility to find a source for that excess and really treat the exchange as a gift, because it is. You have access to food that nobody else has. And it's an important piece of that. I think that's roughly it. We'll talk more in the live session about other opportunities and aspects of this type of work, but farm direct meat is by far the best meat you can pick up from a producer. I think wild meat is a little bit more healthy and definitely has more things to adapt to, especially if you've been commercially or conventionally fed for years. If you like the video, feel free to click that subscribe and like button. If you're not in the family food course and you would like to be, please do reach on over to RegenerativeLiving.online. And if you're in the course, we'll see you in the next session. Thanks, folks.